What's up, guys? Shawnthebro here, and today I want to go over something I'm very excited about and have been excited about for quite some time now. So, we're going to be covering multiple simple hurtboxes. So I call them simple because we have the hitboxes that attach to specific parts of our character, and I've called them complex hurtboxes. So other than that little term there, the rest should make sense. There's multiple of these hitboxes. So we're going to allow the character to have different types of these hurt boxes. So we have this yellow box, which is the hurt box, the blue outline box back there, which is the throw box, and we have 3 green hurt boxes, low, mid, and high. You can kind of see them. You can see where the outlines go. So if I use my mouse, see low goes to here, it somewhat overlaps with mid, which goes up here, and then high is for the head. Yellow is this guy, which is the push box, and the blue is the throw box. So essentially the way this works is these are all going to adjust with our location. For right now, we only have the push box because our push box is basically going to be our main hurt box and what we've been setting up all this time. Now we're getting all these other hurt boxes, and we have to fill out the logic for them as well. So we're going to make everything functional today except for positioning these hurt boxes and the throw box where they need to be, because that can be a complex process. We can do that by attaching when we move during certain attacks, or we can manually move them depending on what we need to accomplish, and that deserves an episode of its own. But getting these hurt boxes in here, making them all play well together, and allowing them to perform their corresponding actions is what we're covering today. I'd like to quickly go over what I'm mimicking here using Killer Instinct's active hitbox system. So you can see all the hitboxes and hurtboxes here. The green outlines are the hurtboxes, blue outline is the throwbox, and the yellow filled in square is the pushbox. You could see that all the times I was using the throw hitbox, it was missing even against the hurtbox until it collided with the blue outline, which is the throwbox, basically indicating which attacks can actually hit which hurtboxes. You can also see by what I'm doing here that depending on what hurtbox I hit on the character, poor Saberwolf over here is catching a sword to the head, he does a high hit reaction. On top of that, if I were to hit him in the midsection or the bottom, he would do the corresponding hit reaction. You can also see here that I'm trying to mimic the standing on behavior. So one thing that we were able to fix in the previous episode, but we need to adjust with all of our other hurt boxes, is that when we jump on our character, we should instantly slide off as opposed to standing on them. However, it'll be good to stand on them today to give you a few examples, so it can be kind of useful here in this case. You can also see that when Jago crouches, his crouching hitbox, his crouching hurt boxes get smaller. So all of these get resized. You can also tell that it does not actually follow the character directly. The hurt boxes are not attached to a socket. If they were, they would be moving during the animation. You see while the animation moves? But they don't. They do move with certain things, like with this attack, the sweep attack here. You can see that the hurt boxes actually do move with the head and all. But they don't move the entire time that the animation is going. Specifically during idle, it's very easy to tell. You can see that the character is moving and the hurt boxes are not. So this is a little example of what I'm trying to mimic here today. We still have one other episode after this at least to fit in some more hurt box logic. But without any further ado, let's get into the actual episode. So, if you watch the Killer Instinct portion that I put in right before this intro here, then you'll know kind of what everything is. But just to give you a recap, and if you didn't watch it, then here's the explanation. So, the yellow box is the push box. When these collide, and it does take a little bit of a second here based on our sizes and location, but you can see when the push boxes collide, then I can push the character. The same as if the character is crouched. Now, normally, you would not be able to jump on top of your character, but it's a good example here. So you can see I have my push boxes colliding, and this is where our characters meet. You can see that they do not care if they're on the other hurt boxes or the throw box. They only care about this push box, which is the yellow hurt box. And again, all of this would not be visible during actual play, so it's not really a problem. This is just us for debug information that we can use A, to make the game balanced and fair using the hitboxes and hurtboxes, and also just so we can kind of see the effect that we want. Now next, throws. So we have a throw in our game. In this case, in the tutorial, I only have one, but it doesn't matter. We have a throw hitbox for it. Now the throw hitbox, it has to collide with the part of the character that would be thrown in this fight. So you can see that the blue outline, that's probably the hardest one to see, but you can see it there. It's pretty much, it outlines the push box, okay? So it's that blue outline outside of the yellow filled in area. Now, the throw box here, if I try and throw and I collide with the hitbox, you can see this is clearly overlapping with the player's mid hurt box. If I'm colliding with the mid hurt box, then I cannot perform this throw because I'm not colliding with the throw box. However, I could land a hit against that if I wanted to. So let's try it out. You could see there that the strike hitbox clearly collided with the mid hurt box of the other mutant, and thus the mutant took damage. So if I were to try to throw again, but this time the throw hitbox collides with the throw box, I am able to successfully perform the throw. Okay? So colliding with the mid hurt box, nothing. Collide with the throw box, throw succeeds. And this is what the point of these different hurt boxes are. Hurt boxes are very, very important in fighting games because they can control exactly where, what logic occurs based off what hit. So we have our attack set up to go off of mid, low, and high. So depending on what the attack is labeled, we perform the proper hit reaction, all this stuff. However, some games, such as Killer Instinct in the example I showed you before, they actually use the hurt boxes shown to determine the hit reaction. So for example, if I hit mid, then you can see that would be a mid hit reaction. High would be a high hit reaction, and low, same thing, would be a low hit reaction. Now remember that our hit reactions are based off of frames, and our animations are currently too long, so you won't really be able to see the mutant reacting in any way. That's okay, that's intended. We just have to get shorter, better animations, and I haven't put them in yet. However, my point still stands, so if you wanted to base your hit reactions off of that instead of the attacks themselves, all you have to do is check which hurt box was hit, which we will determine in this episode, and then you can set the hitbox's type to be that height, and that way you can make it so the opposing player, the player that is hit, takes the damage and provides the appropriate hit reaction. Anyway, long story short, with all this stuff, this is how we're going to use all this going forward. And the last thing that we're going to cover today is the boxes, resizing, going back to where they are. You see this? I can resize my push box, and it resets when I'm done. I can also launch the enemy player. His hurt box also resizes, and we fixed the issue using this method. We fixed the issue with the camera snapping as well. So all around, this is going to be a good episode. And then in one more episode after this, we'll fix the resizing and the repositioning of all the other hurt boxes as well. Okay, so today's mainly about the push box. Let's get started. So I know that was a long intro, but if you'd like to get caught up in the series and see everything we've done, I believe this is episode 89. We do weekly fighting game episodes, and yeah, we still have a long way to go, but I think you might want to catch up if you're watching this episode because there's a lot that we're going to be using from prior episodes. So I'll leave the entire playlist right here in the top right corner, and you can check it out if you'd like. All right. And then if not, I will show you the previous episode right here in this iCard because this is where we've done the Hurtbox logic for the Pushbox specifically and disabling the capsule collider, which is what we need to do to make today's episode work. All right, so in our code, we're not going to be changing much of anything. I'm actually just going to add 2 variables because they're going to be useful to us down the line. So in our fighter template character.h or whatever your base character is, scroll down. And wherever you put your F vectors, again, I try and put them in order of how much memory they take up, but it doesn't really matter. That's just for readability for myself, and so I kind of know where to look. But where your variables are, I've made 2 variables. I've made standard Hurtbox scale, which is an F vector, and standard Hurtbox offset, which is an F vector. Now, these aren't required, but what these do is this is going to store the default values of the Hurtbox when we attach it to the character, or when we spawn it on the character on begin play. And the reason this is important is because our Hurtboxes are going to be changing a lot. This episode, sure, we only really have it changing when crouching or getting knocked down, but throughout the course of our game, they're going to be changing when we're attacking, when we're getting attacked, when we are performing any sort of move, really. Jumping, crouching, walking, all this stuff is going to change them. And so, you know, we don't want to keep a variable for every one of those cases. There'd be way too many. But in my opinion, it is very helpful to have the default value stored, so we can always just reset to it. We'll be using that a lot, and so we're actually going to set this up in a function where we can just reset to the default values. Now, for those of you that are asking scale and offset, why not have just a transform here? We're never going to really use the rotation. In fact, I don't think we ever will use the rotation in this case. In this 2.5D fighting game. If this is a 3D fighting game, you definitely would want the rotation as well. So I'm not going to include it. I don't need the extra memory. But feel free to just do an F transform, you know, standard Hurtbox transform, whatever, and use that. I'm just going to use two separate variables. All right, perfect. Now let's go into Unreal. And let's go into our base character BP. There's quite a few things we have to do today. None of them are particularly difficult. Oops, I don't know what happened there. Got my tabs rearranged. None of them are particularly difficult. It's just more of a concept thing that we need to figure out. So in the previous episode, we ignored the capsule component's collision with other pawns. And the reason we did this is because the capsule component, let me open up the mutant BP for you. The capsule component would automatically be handling the collision right here. And we don't want that to be the case. In a fighting game, you want the Hurtboxes to handle basically all collisions, including pushing. And because of that, then it doesn't really seem necessary to ever use this as a form of collision anymore. So what I've done is I've actually disabled the collision entirely. Well, not disabled the collision entirely, excuse me. I've disabled the collision between pawns entirely. So I'm going to make this, I'm going to make the capsule component invisible again, because I don't really want to see it. But we're using the Hurtboxes for everything now. So in the previous episode, we ignored, and we just made it to where the pawn overlapped on the capsule component. And that was good. That accomplished what we needed to do. But it doesn't help us determine what other actions are going to occur when other hitboxes collide. For example, throw hitboxes and strike hitboxes. That was just for collision between characters. So we were using the one Hurtbox we had, and it was green before. It was one green square. That green Hurtbox that we had was both the Pushbox, the collision box between the characters, and also the only Hurtbox for the character itself. So the mutant could only take damage by having a hitbox collide with that Hurtbox. So now what we've done instead is I've basically left all the collision logic out of this. Just we deleted it last time. And we just had this one box, which I believe I was calling main Hurtbox. I've now switched it to be HB collision box. You could call it Pushbox. Either way, I put a tag here, Pushbox. It doesn't really matter what you call it, just as long as you know what it is. So HB collision box is my Pushbox. It's my yellow box. It's the main Hurtbox that we were using last time. So if you just rename main Hurtbox to HB collision box, you'll see that all these things adjust with it. For example, we were calling this event called ignore player-to-player collision. It checks the HB collision box and sets the collision responses. This is still good. We're not going to change any of this. Everything here is correct. Same with the throw logic and the animation blueprint. That is all correct already. We don't want to change it. I'm just showing you that I used the exact same. That Pushbox is the Hurtbox that we were using last time. Now, these other four, Hurtbox high, Hurtbox mid, Hurtbox low, and Hurtbox throw are all new. So to give you a recap of kind of how to set this up, In the base character, I add all the static mesh components, but we're not going to adjust the size or location or anything because base character is really just this wrapper class that gets used so that every child class of it has all the data it needs, but it's not, doesn't have any specific details for a specific class. So, go click on your mesh in base character BP, add component, add static mesh components. Add as many as you want. I think high, mid, low, throw, and the pushbox are probably good. However, some games have more, some games have less. So it's up to you. You choose how many you want and make it fit for your game. You don't really have to set anything on them, but I would recommend setting the options that are going to be the same for every character. So the pushbox is always going to be the world dynamic one that we set up last time. Again, I did not change anything with this. I just changed the color. Okay, it went from the green to the yellow. But I did add a component tag called Pushbox. These tags are going to be useful later in the episode, so I would recommend adding them in now, but I will talk about them again later. So if you click on any of these components and look in your details panel, there'll be tags. Sometimes it's shut by default. Open it up. This might be empty. Click plus to add one to it. And then you can add an element in here, whatever you want. It's a tag that we can search for later or that we can use for comparisons. I'm calling this Pushbox. All right. And now if you go to all these other ones, again, didn't really do anything, but important note here. You know how I said let me go back to this guy. You know how I said these hurtboxes don't have collision, just the pushbox does? This is true. So this high hurtbox, mid hurtbox, throwbox, and low hurtbox, they do overlap. We want them to overlap so we know that we are performing an action such as throwing an opponent or attacking them with a strike hitbox. But we don't want to actually be able to walk into that and have it block. So all of these collision settings, except for the pushbox, should have collision presets to be overlap all. Okay, so I just went through all of them. And then the last thing that I would recommend doing is adding the proper component tags. So I'm actually gonna call this top one Pushbox. This hurtbox high I'm gonna call hurtbox high. Hurtbox mid I'm gonna call hurtbox mid. Hurtbox low, and I'm gonna call the HB throw as throwbox because that's a more common term. But it doesn't matter what the names are, okay? It just matters that you know what they are. They don't do anything until we make it do something, so. All right. Now, in spawn hurtboxes, we were previously just doing this. We were adding the pushbox to the simple hurtbox array, which we made in a prior episode, and then we were going through that when we were checking for collisions. And that was good at the time. We do technically still need to do exactly that, but we have to go through and add all of them. Now, you could manually just drag these in and quite literally just add them. You know, you'd have to add it. You'd have to have an add for every one of these, but my point still stands. You could just add each and every one of them. All right, I've actually opted to get rid of that. And what I've done is I've made a new function called set simple hurtbox details. Now, we had set complex hurtbox details, but if you're not going that route, then it's not important. And plus, we already covered that in another episode. So if you do have both of these, then this is what your graph should look like. Otherwise, if you're just going with this new method, all you need is in this function, and really you don't even need two functions for this, but all you need is the set simple hurtbox details function. So make a new function. Call it set simple hurtbox details or whatever you'd like. Just set hurtbox details probably if you're only using one. And then inside the function, it's going to be very similar to our set complex hurtbox details. But I'm still going to go over it entirely because I don't expect you to have knowledge on the other system to implement this one. All right, so in the function, what we do is we grab the mesh. Okay, I just grab the mesh and I get the children components. I'll put this up above so that we can see what we're doing. Okay, and this is going to go through this entire list and grab each and every one of these elements. This is important because all the hurtboxes are going to be children of the mesh. However, we could also have things that are not hurtboxes that are children of the mesh. For example, if you want to have an accessory for your character, it doesn't have to be a hurtbox, and it could still be attached to your mesh. So you could wear a top hat or something, and you want to attach that here. So we have to make sure that what we're checking against here before we add it to the hurtbox array is a hurtbox. So we loop through each of these, and we cast every single individual element to a static mesh component. All right, so this is the first thing. We want to make sure it is a static mesh component because all hurtboxes will be a static mesh component. Then we get the object name, and we check if it contains, if you drag off of this and do string contains, see where it says string contains. This is going to search the name of this string for a specific substring, or basically a sequence of characters that are in that name. So if we get the names are HB collision box, HB high, and so on. Well, I've intentionally named them all like this so that I could search for that substring. Use case just means that it has to match this capitalization, so capital H, capital B. The way this works is this will return true if the name of this object, of any of these objects, has the substring HB underscore in it. All of these do. Again, if you have another object that's not a hurtbox, it might not have that string in it, or rather, it should not have that string in it, and thus, it will not get added to the hurtbox array. So we're going to drag off this return, put it into a branch, and then here is where we're going to add to our simple hurtbox array. We're going to add the casted static mesh component right here. Now, I'm going to delete this logic I just showed you because it's all written below already, but hopefully that it makes sense why it works that way. So here's me panning over it so you can see. It's the exact same logic that we just set up. However, at the end of the loop, once the for each loop has completed, I do this little thing to just toggle visibility. We'll make visibility an option in the game mode or in the game instance, so it's something that we won't handle manually later on. But for now, a quick toggle for yourself. I just, on completion of this loop of all the children components of the mesh, I get the simple hurtbox array, loop through all the elements, call set visibility, and I can toggle it on and off. New visibility checked is true, meaning we will see the hurtboxes. All right, so just make sure you're calling this function in spawn hurtboxes, or flat out, if you don't need both methods, you could actually call it right here if you'd like. Either way, just make sure you're calling that new function. I'm going to close these tabs to clean it up a little bit here. But there's one other thing we need to do in begin play, and it doesn't really matter when it happens, it's just these need to exist already. However, they are attached to the character by default, so they should exist as soon as the character exists. I do it at the end of begin play to be safe, just to make sure everything else has gone through. But I'm going to set the two variables that we used, or that we created in code. So specifically, standard hurtbox scale and standard hurtbox offset. Logic here is very simple. I care mainly about the HB collision box. Right now, we know the other hurtboxes are going to change quite frequently, and we're not going to keep variables for all of them, but the pushbox is the one we care about the most right now. A, because it's the one that we are actively resizing already in the series, and B, because it is the one that determines collision between players, which we have working already, so we need to make sure this is still working with all these changes. The rest can be added to and modified to work later on. All right, so we have the HB collision box here. Again, you can just drag it. This is the push box, remember that. And I just drag off of it, and I get world scale. You can actually get the relative scale if you want. And I get relative location. All right, and then I just set these to the corresponding variables. Set standard hurtbox scale. Set standard hurtbox offset. All right. So, now, that's us setting the variables that we need. All right, so the next thing we need to do is actually put these on a character. That way we can at least see what it looks like and where it's going to be. Now, a few notes on this. in the Killer Instinct video, if you watch that, or just in fighting games in general, the hurtboxes are not usually in the center of the character like we have them here. They will actually render on top of the character. This is something we can configure with something called a custom render depth stencil, or a render depth stencil, either way. But these render depths are essentially a order for the renderer to know what to draw on top and what to draw behind it. We don't have that set up yet. It's the same way we can set our HUD to draw on top of other things as well. And so right now, our hurtboxes are directly in the center of the character, which is a little bit ugly, but don't worry, it's something we will end up fixing. For now, let's just get these in here. Now, one thing you need to do that I haven't shown yet, but I will, is probably make a material for this. You don't by any means need it to look like mine with the outlines as green and things. I was trying to copy Killer Instinct so it was clear what was going on. But it's not necessary. However, if you do have all these hurtboxes overlapping, it might be very confusing. So for now, let's put these in, and we'll see how it looks. But I will also go over the materials a little bit later on. All right, so for each of these, assuming that, again, your character is a child of your base character where you just added them, then you're going to have all of these hurtboxes, these static mesh components, as inherited. So you can just click on any of them and set your options. I use the 1 meter cube for everything. Okay, I changed my scale, my location, and my materials, of course. But as for the static mesh, I just use the basic cube that's in starter content. All right, so I use the cube and I pick the material. For this one, since I knew it was going to be filled in, the Pushbox, I just used the regular proximity hitbox. Now, let's go to the high, mid, and low hurtboxes. For them, I use the cube. I use this material called Hitbox Outline. And then let's look at our collision presets on here. Just make sure everything is good. So the Pushbox should still be rolled dynamic with block all. The hurtboxes should still say overlap all. And the Throwbox should say overlap all. All right. Don't worry about these. All of these are for the complex hurtboxes, which are not at all necessary. Again, just an alternative method, more often used in platform fighters and that sort of thing. This is all we're worried about today. All right. So once you have these in here, you can resize them to your liking. I already have them in a spot I like. I picked the scale of 0.05. This location can really be 0. It doesn't matter. I happen to like 12, 72, whatever. You can change these. You can just drag them. I'm going to undo this when I'm done, but I can make this as big or as small as I'd like. I tried to follow, again, what Killer Instinct did just because I know that that is something that works. So basically from the ground to right around their head or a little bit under is their Pushbox. Their high hurtbox refers to only really their head. Their mid refers to, well, anywhere in their midsection, and the low refers to basically their legs, knees area. The Throwbox basically outlines the Pushbox, so essentially if any collision occurs within the Pushbox, then they can be thrown. And that's basically how I have set it up. So, the dimensions for everything aren't really important. I'll go through and click very quickly for you if you want to actually copy those values, but that's all up to you. I'll go over how I made the material very quickly. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but it is helpful to have the outline material here. So this is a little bit ugly because I did it pretty quickly, and I'm not the best with materials, so I do some research, I figure out what I need to do, and I try and implement it. Basically, here's the material graph. I'm not going to try and explain everything to you because I don't entirely understand. Again, this is all research that I've done on materials themselves and, you know, how to get outline effects and things like that. But long story short, this is the color that is going to be shown. You have to make sure you have something in the emissive color and something in the opacity because we want to render the middle as basically transparent, either fully or completely. That way we can show the outline of the hurtboxes. You can see that's how I've done it here, is these are basically, they're not fully transparent. You can see a little hurtbox here, but the main thing is the outlines of the Throwbox and the other Hurtboxes. So this opacity, this is a scalar parameter. Basically, it just means it's a value that you can use and assign to whatever you want. So I could call it value and then give it a default value of 5. In this case, I have opacity and I've given it a value of 0.7. Fresnel is what is really used to determine where you're going to be outlined. So if you change these values, 0.5 to 5, you can see how much that changes. Kind of changes how big the outline is going to be. And then that changes how much of the inside is actually shown there. Okay? Next, multiplying these together. So all of this multiplication needs to occur and go into this lerp. This lerp is just a black color. You can call it whatever you want. I actually meant to call this color 1, and I never did. It's still param, so let me fix that. Color and color 2. Color 2 is basically, it doesn't matter what color it is. We just need a color to go to, preferably white or black for the blending to make it look better. And since we're trying to go to transparent, I preferred black since black is the absence of color. Again, I'm not great with materials. I'm not going to try and explain how all this works because I had to look up most of it myself. But this is a custom material that I pulled from 2 or 3 different sources, so feel free to take that. The important parts that we have to see here are also, if you click just anywhere on the graph, okay, not on any of these nodes, then you get this details panel that you can choose things. Make sure the blend mode is translucent because that's the only way it will be, you'll be able to see through it. I set it to unlit because that was also recommended. The lighting can actually affect the reflections and things like that, which we don't want in this case. I made it 2-sided just so if it is flipped to left or right, you'll still be able to see it. And I don't believe I changed anything else. You could change these. I don't believe I did that. I think they were set by default when I changed the other settings, but there you go. So that should be all my settings that you need to see to make this material if you'd like. And again, I don't want to take too much time on it, but the Throwbox is actually exactly the same. You can duplicate it. You can duplicate it and just use it right here. Just notice that I've changed this parameter to be a blue color as opposed to green. And there you go. Cool. So that's how my materials are there. And I point them out because I don't know how easy it will be to follow them if you have like 5 overlapping boxes that are all filled in. It'll probably be very ugly and very confusing. That's why I had to go with that, the outline. Now, I still haven't done anything in the event graph for the child. I've just set up my Hurtboxes to be where they want, applied my materials, and we're good to go. Okay. Now with this, we have 2 more functions we need to alter, modify Hurtbox, and reset Hurtbox, and we also need to edit some logic in the Hitbox Actor itself to make sure that this works. Let's actually do the Hitbox Actor first because that's the next most important thing. Make sure that our collision is going to work based off the types that we want. So again, don't be confused by all this. All this collision logic is just because we are trying not to... I'm trying to support both simple and complex collisions, and I don't want to make this more confusing than it has to be. So I've made functions for each of them, but I know when you're looking at this, that's probably pretty intimidating. So if you're not familiar, don't worry too much. Just basically know this. This is the strat here. So we determine the player that is being hit. In this case, we just determined player 1 or 2. We are going to actually end up getting tag teams in here, so we'll probably need to make this a reference as opposed to just 1 or 2. But regardless, we need to know that the character being hit is not the owner. Then, in the collision logic, we were determining if it was complex or simple Hurtboxes. In this case, and pretty much every episode going forward, if not every single episode going forward, we are going to use check simple collision. In the template itself, I'm going to enable the ability to change between simple and complex Hurtboxes. I'll try and keep it prepared on the back end. That way, everything still works for it. But for now, we're just focusing on check simple collision. Now, if we go into this function, You may not have had this function in the past if you did not use the check complex collision. So basically, you can see the entire thing, the Hitbox Actor BP, the entire flow. We check the collision, check the owner, and see who should be taking the damage. Then here is where we were checking to see if there was an overlap between the main Hurtbox and this Hitbox display. So basically, if these static meshes overlapped at all. And then we were calling take damage and launching them with all the necessary information off that Hitbox. Well, now all I've done is I've created a check simple collision function. Added a function. Set the types to be fighter template character, so basically our base character object reference. And has collision occurred boolean as an output. You can add them by clicking these pluses right here. And now all I do is I call this function, I pass in the player reference that I want to check, and then I do a branch off of it. And if it's true that a collision has occurred, then this player takes damage. So it is a pretty simplified method. All right, so let's get into the function itself. So in here, what we want to do is we essentially want to loop through all of the objects that we have collided with or that are in our Hurtbox array. And we want to check and see if the hitbox that has been thrown out there, the hitbox in question, has collided with any of the Hurtboxes. If it has, we want to perform the appropriate logic. So if we were to drag off our player reference here for check simple collision and type simple Hurtbox array. Remember, we added all of our Hurtboxes on our character to this earlier. I do check if the player is valid in here just to be safe, just in case it's ever not valid or in case we're ever using like a one-player game mode. And technically this would work for the tag stuff I was talking about earlier. But anyway, I check if the player is valid. I grab the simple Hurtbox array, and as long as it is valid, we're going to for each through this. I'm going to mimic this above so you can see what's going on as I create it. Okay, so here's the for each. This is going to grab each and every individual Hurtbox that we determined was assigned to that character. We want to drag off of them, and we want to grab their component tags. The way you do that is get component tags, and it returns an array. Now, component tags are things that we manually add, remember. They never get actually added unless we do something with them. So we can do whatever we want. This is just for categorizing and scripting, as it says here. And essentially what that means is you use it as you see fit, right? There's nothing for it. So we know what all of our component tags are because we manually wrote them. What we can do now is in here, we can get the component tag, and I'm going to get a reference to index 0. Because right now, I know that on these Hurtboxes, there's only one component tag anyway. I have to make sure that every Hurtbox has at least one component tag, but not more than one component tag. And if it does have more than one, then I'll need to handle that separately, okay? So we have index 0 is the first component tag. I can actually do a switch on a name here, believe it or not. This is basically, you can just do a name equals if you'd like, but you can also do a switch, add pins, click on the switch, and actually reset these values to be the name. And you can see I can set this to Pushbox, HB high, HB low. I meant to make that one mid, but it's fine. We can do a little bit out of order in this case. And Throwbox. All right, so that's how I've gotten this switch down below. I'm going to delete this now because I don't feel like typing all that out. But, okay, so you can see that we have the component tags. And what this does is it'll check the component tag at this index, and it will see if it's an exact match for this. So whatever we put in here. Now, again, we know exactly what we put in there, so we will know if it's a match or not. So say a collision occurred, and the component tag of the static mesh component, or rather the Hurtbox that it collided with, has a component tag of HB underscore high. Then we know that we collided with the high Hurtbox. So we know what logic we can do going forward. All right? So before we had everything as one hurtbox. So throws, attacks, projectiles, pushing, all that was done through one hurtbox. Now we can separate the logic. Since we have the height on the hurtbox itself, I'm not worried about that right now. However, I do want to only deal damage if the attack landed against a hurtbox, not the throwbox or the pushbox. So I've brought all high, mid, and low to the same spot, and I check if the hitbox type is equal to strike. Hitbox type is part of our Hitbox Actor class. So you can just do get hitbox type, drag off, equal enum, strike. Okay, you bring this into a branch, and if it's true, then we go into logic. I'll show you in a second. Then, if this object, this hurtbox that was collided with, was the throwbox, then we want to make sure that the hitbox type is actually a type throw. Otherwise, we don't want to actually do anything. So you do it the same way, equal, but then you check against throw. Both branches, only if they're true, do they go to this next branch. The next branch checks and makes sure that this array element that we are checking is overlapping component of hitbox display. Hitbox display is the static mesh of the hitbox itself, which is like the ones that we spawn when we perform attacks. So you can drag off of it to is overlapping component. In this case, since I am doing a for loop, I like to make it the target, but you don't have to. So I just make the hitbox display the other component. All right. And then that goes into another branch. So if the corresponding types, strike against hurtboxes and throws against throwboxes have collided, and we know that they are in fact overlapping, then we say, yes, a collision has occurred. Now, this variable is a local variable that I have. It's just basically there so that I can return a value from this function. Very simple. You have this local variables section whenever you're in a function in a blueprint. You can press add local variable and make it a Boolean and call it collision occurred. It's false by default, so we're going to return it once this loop completes. The only time we ever set it is if this is true. If all these evaluate to true, then we know we want to proceed with, the damage or the throw or whatever logic we have. So set this to be true. And then you can see I go around to my for each and I break and say, yep, we found a collision. We don't need to loop through all the other collisions. If you loop through all the other collisions, you'll continuously do damage to the character, even though you've already hit them. So you would, if you hit two of their hurtboxes, for example, they would actually take double the damage. And plus it would just run longer than it has to, which would slow down your game. Now, when this loop is completed, which when we trigger a break, it will automatically go to completed, or when it has run out of elements to loop through, it will go to completed. We want to then have a return node. It should be there by default, but if you lose it or delete it, you can always hit add return node, and then pass in the local variable. And so essentially what we've done is we've checked to see if there was a collision at all, and then we determined if it was a proper collision, so a collision of the corresponding hurtbox to the hitbox that is in question. Then if it is, we bring that into a branch, and if it's true, we then go and do the rest of the logic. This is all handled in other episodes. We will most likely be cleaning this up to just one section. This works for 2 players, but since we're going to have tag teams, we don't necessarily just want player 1 and 2. We're going to want what team it's on or different things like that. So this will get cleaned up in the future. But again, long story short, determine the player, check if any of the hurtboxes have been collided with and the owner of the hitbox is not the owner of the hurtbox, and then perform the proper logic for taking damage or being thrown or whatever. Okay? All right. Now, that's all good, and that should basically mean that you can take damage and you can move appropriately with all your hurtboxes. However, we do want to do a little bit of resizing here because we had resizing logic for our hurtboxes in the past, but it wasn't fully functional because our hurtboxes were kind of being overwritten by some of the things that the capsule collider did and things like that. So in the past, we set up 3 events. We set up resize to crouching hurtbox, resize to default hurtbox, and resize to knockdown hurtbox. And we were taking the character reference. This is all in the animation blueprint of the character. We were taking the animation, we were taking the character reference of the animation blueprint, and we were calling modify hurtbox, which is a function inside of our base character BP. This function, again, we already set it up in the past, but it takes in basically a scale for the width and the height, or the Y and the Z, or the, excuse me, it would actually be, yeah, the Y and the Z, and then the vector of an offset so we know where to move the hurtbox to. And it worked, but we never had it working without several other bugs. So now, you can leave this alone. You don't have to modify anything with modify hurtbox. Maybe change your values if you don't like the way it looks or if it's in the wrong spot. But the one thing you do have to change is when we were resizing to the default hurtbox or the knockdown hurtbox, we were doing things with set capsule half height. This was good to kind of change our collision between characters when the capsule component was the thing that was dealing with collisions. As you can see, I've actually disconnected it. It is not in the white line. Is not connected. So I'm going to delete it. I want to show you guys before I deleted it. So I deleted it now. You do not need that anymore. This is actually what was causing that little like the camera snapping back and forth when you would crouch, uncrouch, or get up from a knockdown attack. And so now that is fixed, and it's actually fixed legitimately, not fixed with a band-aid or anything. We actually fixed it. We don't need to use that logic anymore. And same with these 2 functions though, or these 2 events. They actually are the same as they were. I did not change them other than removing those 2 nodes you just saw. So change your values, you know, whatever, modify hurtbox, copy this if you never had this episode, or if you never had this logic from this episode, whatever you want to do. Doesn't really matter. Just showing you what I got. That's everything. So lastly, let's update the modify hurtbox and reset hurtbox, because we do have quite a few changes for them that we do need to actually address. So for modify hurtbox, the thought behind modify hurtbox is that it takes the character's pushbox and adjusts it. We also could use this in the future for adjusting other hitboxes, or excuse me, other hurtboxes manually by just passing in an index here. So we may do that, be aware, but for now this is strictly for the pushbox. I'm just getting everything working that we had with the new system, as opposed to adding a bunch of new stuff into it as well. But this is the same as it was last episode. So we take our simple hurtbox array, we get a copy of 0, which is again our pushbox. Then we are going to grab the width and height from the input parameters to set the world scale 3D to the Y and Z. Now, when you call set world scale 3D, I've already been over this. It will be a vector type. Okay. You can right click on it and split struct pin to get all the values, like how I have X, Y, and Z here. Now, something I've done, and this is on purpose, this is in the base character BP. So normally we don't do anything that is specific to a certain character. For example, we shouldn't do anything specific to the mutant in the base character BP. That should be handled in mutant BP. But I've decided that I want all the hurtboxes to be the same depth. And this is because I don't want any of them to be bigger than others. You know, we don't need it. All right, we're fighting on a 2.5D. This is a 2.5D experience. We're fighting on one plane, essentially. Or really 2 planes. But what I mean is we're not fighting with the X-axis in Unreal. See the red line? X is how deep it goes. Yeah, we're not fighting with that in this case. So the X scale, I'm always keeping at 0.05, excuse me. You can pick any value you want. If you make it bigger, it is going to quite literally look bigger. So I wanted to make it look pretty small, but I wanted it to have a little bit of depth. Just as the camera kind of pans around, you can see the edges a little bit more. So it does give a minor effect when you can actually see them. Okay, so I've forced the new scale to always go back to 0.05 just because that's the value I'm going to be using for that, for all Hurtboxes on all characters. But what's new in this function is that I'm also doing the offset logic again because we took it out last time. We had to change around our logic, and now I'm going to add it back with our new logic. So if you drag off of the 0 again, how you were just setting world scale, we can set relative location right here. And the way you do that is I take the current relative location, drag off it again, get relative location, and drag off of this and do vector plus vector. Vector plus vector. Then you add in the offset value. So you take the relative location, add in the vector that is passed into the function, and then set that to be the new relative location. So when it gets called that we want to crouch, I change the scale of the Hurtbox, and then I change the offset to be 10 units to the right, and then negative 25 units down. And that's how I get my crouch Hurtbox in place. Okay. And then when we get knocked down and the Hurtbox is now in place, what I do is I set the width to be 2 times the regular scale, 0.3 times the height scale, and then I move it 50 units down. And now the Hurtboxes move properly. But the last thing we need to do is reset it properly so that when the character goes back to their initial state, the Hurtbox also goes back to that state. Now, you could do that by calling modify Hurtbox again and passing in the values, but for me, I thought it was much easier to just have the values stored. And so that's why in begin play, we actually kept track of the standard Hurtbox scale and offset data. That way we could literally just reset it with these values. So if you go to reset Hurtbox, this also pretty much just looked like this in the previous episode, but with all zeros, I believe, or all ones for the scale. And so the scaling was a little bit off. Now what we can do is we grab our simple Hurtbox array, get a copy of the element at index 0. We call set world scale 3D, and we pass in the standard Hurtbox scale. Then we take the same item, call set relative location, and we pass in standard Hurtbox offset as the new location. This will always make sure that the correct values are being reset when we call reset Hurtboxes. So no matter what action happens, if we're thrown, if we're jumping, if we just call this, then we go back to the default Hurtbox data. Every move and action will override it anyway, so it's not dangerous to do this. We can do it, and it can always be overwritten to another attack or action or location. So thank you so much for watching. Let's click it back into this. I'll talk shortly, because I know this has been going on for a bit. I'll talk shortly about the future. So, for the Hurtboxes in the future, we have to move them in front of our character by using that custom render. Same with the HUD. Don't worry, I didn't forget. And we also have to make sure that the other Hurtboxes resize, not just the Pushbox. Now, this is going to be a very manual process, and that's actually okay. Fighting games are expected to be very manual with their attacks. There's no real way to hard code them, or to automate them, sorry, because a lot of it is specific to the animation or attack itself. You could come up with a system that, you know, oh, it uses this bone and all this stuff. You could be so fancy with it. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of adjustments or balancing that needs to be done. So quite frankly, a lot of this stuff is going to have to be manual. However, we're going to go over that in the next Hurtbox episode and hopefully cover all that up and make it as painless as possible. Looking forward to the series. Now that we have our Hurtboxes in a state where I am happy with them, we are going to be getting back into combat flow, and I want to start doing combos, a little bit more advanced combos, and I also want to be able to push the character off. That way there aren't collisions when you're standing on them. We did figure out how to do this last episode, but now we have multiple Hurtboxes, and we need to actually resize them and ignore when it's correct to do so. That way we can make the game function as we'd like. That's why I wanted to make sure we got all these Hurtboxes done in time. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for me and the channel than anything else you can do. I really, really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to all my Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorial series, feel free to join the Discord community. We'll give you free assistance and be happy to have you. Anyway, guys, that's all I got. So once again, I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.